Sarah's act of kindness in rescuing an elderly woman from a lethal blizzard exploded in her face when the woman's ruthless billionaire son appeared. At the diner the next day, cold eyes fixed on her as if she'd committed a crime rather than saved his mother's life. The crisp $100 bills he slapped on the table to compensate her burned like an insult, but it was the flash of the distinctive gold ring on his finger, identical to the one the old woman had shown her, that truly stole her breath away. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Sometimes fate hinges on a single moment of kindness. For Sarah Miller, a 26-year-old waitress at Hartwell's, an upscale diner in downtown Millfield, that moment came during the worst blizzard the city had seen in decades. The wind howled like a wounded animal, snowflakes swirling in hypnotic patterns outside the restaurant's windows. It was nearly closing time, and Sarah's muscles ached from a 12-hour shift, but she smiled anyway because that's what you do when tips are the difference between making rent and sleeping in your car. "Another coffee, Mrs. Donovan?" Sarah asked the lone remaining customer. An elderly regular who always ordered the same thing, Earl Grey tea with a splash of milk, no sugar, and a slice of apple pie that she would methodically dissect but rarely finish. Eleanor Donovan looked up with cloudy blue eyes that still sparkled with intelligence despite her 87 years. "No, dear. I should be heading home soon." She glanced toward the window, her face tightening with worry. "Though it seems I've miscalculated the weather." Sarah followed her gaze. The snow had intensified in the last hour, building white mounds that swallowed parked cars whole. The plows had given up. The city had surrendered to winter's fury. "Mrs. Donovan, do you have someone coming to get you?" Sarah asked, though she already suspected the answer. The older woman's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her teacup. "My regular driver isn't available tonight. I thought I could manage a taxi, but ... She let the sentence hang in the air, unfinished. Sarah knew Eleanor lived alone in a Victorian house on Maple Street, about 3 miles from the diner. Her husband had died years ago and her children well. Mrs. Donovan never discussed family beyond vague references to my son, who was apparently too busy to visit. Mike, the manager, emerged from the back, keys jingling. "Sarah, I'm cutting the power to the kitchen. We're closing up. Storm's only getting worse." "Mike, Mrs. Donovan needs a ride home," Sarah said, keeping her voice low. He shot a sympathetic but firm look toward the elderly woman. "I live in the opposite direction and my truck barely handles these roads. Can't she call someone?" "I've tried," Eleanor interjected with quiet dignity. "It seems everyone is sensibly staying indoors. I'll manage perhaps a hotel nearby." "I'll take you," Sarah said, the words tumbling out before she could reconsider. "I have chains on my tires. I can drop you at home on my way." It wasn't exactly on her way. It was decidedly not on her way. Sarah lived in a cramped apartment above a laundromat on the south side. Eleanor's neighborhood was north, in the old money part of town where houses had names rather than numbers. Mike raised an eyebrow, but knew better than to argue. Sarah had that stubborn set to her jaw that meant her mind was made up. 30 minutes later, Sarah's ancient Honda Civic crawled through streets transformed into Arctic tundra. The windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the relentless snow, and the heater wheezed asthmatically. Beside her, Eleanor Donovan sat ramrod straight, her worn leather purse clutched tightly on her lap like a shield. "Left at the next corner," the older woman directed, her voice steady despite the car's alarming slide when Sarah braked too sudden. "The White House with the wrought iron fence." White House was a misnomer, Sarah thought as they approached. It was a mansion, 3 stories of Victorian splendor with gabled windows and an elaborate portico, now blanketed in snow. The wrought iron fence emerged from drifts like the ribs of a massive creature. "Here we are," Eleanor said with evident relief. "I cannot thank you enough, my dear." Sarah pulled up as close to the gate as possible, but it was still a treacherous 30-foot walk to the front door. "Let me help you inside, Mrs. Donovan." The wind slapped them both as they exited the car, stealing breath and stinging exposed skin. Sarah wrapped her arm around Eleanor's thin shoulders, feeling the older woman's fragility as they navigated the buried path. By the time they reached the porch, Eleanor was trembling from exertion. "The key," she gasped, fumbling in her purse with fingers stiffened by cold. Sarah gently took the ornate brass key and unlocked the massive oak door. They stumbled inside to darkness and bone-chilling cold. "The power's out," Eleanor said unnecessarily. The house was a cavern of shadows, the temperature barely warmer than outside. The generator should have kicked in. Sarah helped Eleanor to a brocade settee in what appeared to be a formal sitting room, then found her way to the kitchen by the light of her phone. The generator had indeed failed. The ancient furnace was silent. In a house this size with these high ceilings, the temperature would drop dangerously low within hours. When she returned, Eleanor had removed her coat but still wore her scarf and gloves. In the phone's harsh light, she looked smaller, frailer, her face etched with lines of worry. "Mrs. Donovan, is there anywhere else you can go tonight? A neighbor, perhaps?" Eleanor shook her head. "Most are away for the winter. The Hargroves next door are in Florida until April." Sarah made a quick decision. "You can't stay here. It's too cold and the storm might last days. You're coming home with me. I couldn't possibly impose. It's not an imposition. My apartment is small but warm. The building has a generator that has never failed." Sarah didn't add that it was because the laundromat downstairs couldn't afford to lose business. "Please, Mrs. Donovan, I'd worry about you all night." Something in the older woman's expression expression softened. You're very kind, Sarah, but I need a few things if I'm to leave. They gathered essentials, medication from a bathroom cabinet, a change of clothes, a framed photograph of a distinguished-looking man, and curiously a small wooden box that Eleanor insisted on carrying herself. The drive to Sarah's apartment was tense but uneventful. The streets now eerily empty except for the occasional snowplow fighting a losing battle. Sarah's apartment was exactly as she'd described, small but warm. The furniture was mismatched but comfortable. The walls decorated with botanical illustrations Sarah had drawn herself. Eleanor took it all in with quiet interest. You're an artist, she observed, gesturing to the drawing. Just a hobby, Sarah said, pulling out her sofa bed. I work at the diner to pay the bills. You have talent, Eleanor said simply, as if stating an irrefutable fact. Sarah helped Eleanor settle in, provided a nightgown that was too large but serviceable, and made sure the older woman took her medication. As she prepared tea in the tiny kitchen, she noticed Eleanor opening the wooden box she'd brought, removing something that caught the light with a golden gleam before quickly tucking it away again. Is there anyone you'd like me to call? Sarah asked, handing Eleanor a steaming mug of chamomile. To let them know you're safe? A shadow crossed Eleanor's face. No, dear. There's no one who would be concerned tonight. The sadness in those words hung in the air between them. Sarah thought of her own family, scattered but present. Her mother in Arizona, her brother in Seattle, both a phone call away. How lonely it must be to have no one to notify in an emergency. Well, you're safe here, Sarah said firmly. We'll ride out the storm together. Eleanor's smile was tired but genuine. You're a rare soul, Sarah Miller. There aren't many who would inconvenience themselves for an old woman. It's not an inconvenience, Sarah insisted. It's just being human. Later, after Eleanor had fallen asleep on the pull-out sofa, Sarah stood at her window watching the relentless snow transform the world. She thought about the elegant house standing empty, cold, about Eleanor's resigned acceptance of her solitude, about the mysterious golden object in the wooden box. There was a story there. One Sarah couldn't yet guess. She had no way of knowing that by rescuing Eleanor Donovan from the blizzard, she had set in motion events that would transform her life completely. She couldn't have imagined that within 24 hours, she would come face to face with a man whose name appeared regularly in financial papers, whose net worth had 9 zeros, and whose cold eyes held secrets that connected to the elderly woman now sleeping peacefully in her apartment. Sarah Miller had acted out of kindness, nothing more. But kindness, like a stone thrown into still water, creates ripples that travel farther than anyone can predict. Morning arrived with blinding brilliance, sunlight reflecting off snow-covered streets like millions of scattered diamonds. Sarah woke early from habit, momentarily confused by the sound of gentle breathing coming from her living room. Then she remembered Donovan, the blizzard, the rescue. She padded quietly to the kitchen, careful not to wake her elderly guest. The city outside was paralyzed, transformed into a winter wonderland that would have been beautiful if it weren't so dangerous. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mike. Diner closed today. Roads impassable. Stay safe, a day off. Sarah couldn't remember the last time she'd had an unplanned day to herself. She was mixing pancake batter when Eleanor appeared in the kitchen doorway, looking surprisingly dignified despite wearing Sarah's oversized flannel pajamas. Good morning, dear. I hope I haven't overslept, Eleanor said, her silver hair neatly combed, face freshly washed. Not at all. The diner's closed today, too much snow. How did you sleep? Quite well, considering. Eleanor looked out the window at the transformed cityscape. Goodness, it seems we made the right decision. Sarah served breakfast at her small kitchen table, blueberry pancake, the last of her fresh berries that would have spoiled anyway with the power outages across the city. Eleanor ate with surprising appetite for someone so small and frail-looking. This is delicious, she said appreciatively. You're quite the cook. Occupational hazard, Sarah smiled. You pick things up after years of serving food. Eleanor nodded, her eyes taking in the apartment with its second-hand furniture and carefully maintained cleanliness. How long have you worked at Hartwell's? 6 years now, since I dropped out of art school. Art school? So the drawings aren't just a hobby? Sarah shrugged, a gesture meant to seem casual, though the subject still stung. I had to make a living. Art doesn't pay the bills, at least not my art. May I see more of your work? Eleanor asked, her interest seemingly genuine. Surprised but pleased, Sarah retrieved her portfolio from under her bed. Eleanor examined each drawing and painting with the careful attention of someone who knew what they were looking at. Her thin fingers traced the air above a series of botanical illustrations, medicinal herbs rendered in exquisite detail. You have remarkable talent, she said finally. A true eye for detail and composition. Thank you, Sarah said, feeling a flush of pleasure at the compliment. It's just, don't diminish your gifts, Eleanor interrupted with unexpected sharpness. I've seen enough art in my lifetime to recognize genuine ability. The statement hung between them, another hint at a life Sarah knew nothing about. She was about to ask more when Eleanor's expression changed, her hand flying to her chest. My pills, she said, voice suddenly thin. In my purse. Sarah rushed to retrieve the medication, watching anxiously as Eleanor swallowed a small white tablet with shaking hands. Color gradually returned to her face, but the episode left her looking exhausted. Just a little arrhythmia, Eleanor explained, seeing Sarah's concern. Nothing to fuss over. Should I call someone? A doctor? Sarah asked. Eleanor shook her head. It's a chronic condition. well managed usually. She hesitated, then added, though perhaps I should let my son know where I am after all. He'll be concerned when he can't reach me at home. Of course, Sarah said, relieved that there was family to contact. Use my phone if you need to. Eleanor made the call from Sarah's bedroom, her voice too low to overhear. When she emerged, her expression was unreadable. He's coming to collect me, she said simply. As soon as the main roads are cleared, Sarah nodded, ignoring a twinge of disappointment. She'd enjoyed Eleanor's company, the quiet dignity of her presence. Tell me about yourself, Sarah, Eleanor said as they settled in the living room with cups of tea. Where did you grow up? The morning passed in gentle conversation. Sarah found herself sharing stories she rarely told anyone about her childhood in a small mining town. Her mother, who worked double shifts at the local hospital, her scholarship to art school that hadn't quite covered all the expenses, her dreams of illustrating medicinal plant guides. Eleanor listened with genuine interest, occasionally sharing her own carefully edited anecdotes. She spoke of traveling to Paris as a young woman, of gardens she had tended, of books that had changed her perspective. But Sarah noticed the omissions, no mentions of her husband beyond acknowledging he had passed, little about her son beyond that he existed, nothing about how she had come to live alone in that massive house. Around noon, Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID displayed unknown number. Hello? She answered cautiously. Is this Sarah Miller? The male voice was crisp, authoritative. Yes, this is she. This is Alexander Donovan. I believe my mother is with you. Sarah's stomach tightened at his tone, not grateful, not relieved, but coolly suspicious. Yes, Mrs. Donovan is here. She's fine. I'll be there in 20 minutes. What's the address? After she provided her address, he hung up without saying goodbye. Sarah turned to find Eleanor watching her with an apologetic expression. Alexander can be rather abrupt, she said. He means well. Sarah nodded, though she wasn't convinced. She helped Eleanor gather her things and change back into her own clothes, freshly dried from yesterday's snow soaking. Eleanor insisted on folding Sarah's borrowed nightclothes with military precision. Thank you for your kindness, Eleanor said, pressing Sarah's hand between her own. It's a rare thing, especially these days. Before Sarah could respond, there was a sharp knock at the door. 3 raps, evenly spaced, oddly commanding. She opened the door to find a tall man in an impeccably tailored suit, a cashmere overcoat draped over his arm. His features might have been handsome if not for the cold assessment in his eyes as they swept over Sarah, her apartment, cataloging and dismissing in the same glance. Ms. Miller? He asked, though it wasn't really a question. Yes, you must be Mr. Donovan. He nodded curtly and stepped past her without waiting for an invitation. His presence immediately filled the small apartment, making it seem shabbier, smaller. Mother, he said, his voice softening slightly as he approached Eleanor. Are you all right? Perfectly fine, Alexander, Eleanor replied, her own voice taking on a formality Sarah hadn't heard before. Ms. Miller has been extraordinarily kind. Alexander Donovan turned to Sarah, his expression unreadable. Thank you for assisting my mother. How much do I owe you? The question hit Sarah like a slap. Excuse me? For your trouble, your time, the inconvenience. He reached for his wallet. Nothing, Sarah said, heat rising to her cheek. I didn't help your mother for money. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or skepticism. Nevertheless, I insist on compensating. Alexander, Eleanor's voice cut through the tension. Sarah took me in during a dangerous storm when I had nowhere to go. She shared her home, her food, her clothes. That is not something you can put a price on. He turned to his mother. And Sarah saw something pass between, a silent communication built on years of history she couldn't begin to understand. At least let me reimburse you for expenses, he said to Sarah, his tone marginally less cold. That's really not necessary, Sarah insisted. I checked on your house, Mother, Alexander said, turning away from Sarah. The power is still out, but I've arranged for a generator to be delivered and installed today. You can come home with me until it's sorted out. Actually, Eleanor said with surprising firmness, I'd like to invite Sarah to dinner first, tonight at your house, Alexander, to properly thank her. The look of shock on Alexander Donovan's face might have been comical in other circumstances. Mother, I don't think, I insist, Eleanor said, the steel beneath her gentle exterior suddenly visible. Sarah saved my life last night. The least we can do is offer her a proper meal. Alexander's jaw tightened, but he nodded curtly. As you wish. 7 o'clock. He handed Sarah a business card with an address embossed in dark blue ink. We'll expect you then. Sarah took the card automatically, too stunned to refuse. The address was in Westridge, the most exclusive neighborhood in the city. As Alexander helped his mother into her coat, Eleanor caught Sarah's eye and winked, a surprisingly mischievous gesture from the dignified woman. In that moment, Sarah realized there was much more to Eleanor Donovan than met the eye, and she had a feeling dinner was going to be interesting in ways she couldn't yet imagine. Sarah stood in front of her closet, anxiety mounting as she surveyed her limited options. What does one wear to dinner at the home of someone who clearly considered a waitress beneath notice? Her nicest dress, simple black sheath she'd worn to her college roommate's wedding, seemed woefully inadequate, but it would have to do. The address on Alexander Donovan's business card had led her to look him up online, and what she'd found had left her breathless. Alexander Donovan, CEO of Donovan Global Investments, the company that owned half the city's skyline with interests in technology, pharmaceuticals, and sustainable energy. His estimated net worth was in the billions, and she had refused his money, practically lectured him on kindness. Sarah groaned at the memory. Snowplows had finally cleared most of the main roads, though side streets remained treacherous treacherous. Sarah took 2 buses and walked the final half-mile to reach Westridge, her dress shoes tucked into her bag while she navigated the snowy sidewalks in boots. The Donovan residence wasn't just a house. It was an estate. Wrought iron gates opened to a circular driveway leading to a modernist mansion of glass and stone. Lights illuminated the snow-covered grounds, giving the entire property an ethereal glow. Sarah stood at the entrance, suddenly questioning her decision to come. Before she could retreat, the massive front door swung open. A man in a dark suit, not Alexander, but clearly staff, stood in the entryway. "Miss Miller?" he inquired politely. "Yes, I'm Sarah Miller. Please come in, Mrs. Donovan is expecting you." The interior was exactly what Sarah had expected. Soaring ceilings, minimalist furniture that probably cost more than her annual salary, and art pieces that belonged in museums rather than private homes. She followed the butler, for that's clearly what he was, through a series of rooms, each more impressive than the last. They arrived at a sunroom overlooking snow-covered garden. Eleanor sat in a plush chair near a fireplace, looking much more at home in this opulent setting than she had in Sarah's apartment. She wore a simple but elegant navy dress, her silver hair styled in a neat chignon. "Sarah, my dear," Eleanor smiled warmly. "I'm so pleased you came. Thank you for inviting me, Mrs. Donovan. Your home is... incredible." "Oh, this isn't my home," Eleanor said with a small laugh. "This is Alexander's house. Much too modern for my taste, though the gardens are lovely in spring." Before Sarah could respond, Alexander entered the room. He had exchanged his business suit for dark slacks and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly rent. The casual attire did nothing to soften his intimidating presence. "Ms. Miller," he acknowledged with a nod. "I trust you found us without difficulty." "The buses are running again," Sarah said, immediately regretting mentioning public transportation when she saw his eyebrow tick upward. "You took the bus? In this weather?" There was something in his tone, not quite concern, not quite judgment, that made Sarah's spine stiff. "Not everyone has a fleet of luxury cars at their disposal, Alexander," Eleanor chided gently. An awkward silence followed, broken by the butler, announcing that dinner was served. They moved to a dining room where a table that could comfortably seat 12 was set for 3 at one end. Crystal glassware and silver cutlery gleamed under a chandelier that cast a warm glow over the proceedings. Sarah had never been more conscious of her every movement, which fork to use, where to place her napkin. She surreptitiously watched Eleanor and followed her lead. "Sarah is an artist, Alexander," Eleanor remarked as the first course, a delicate soup Sarah couldn't identify, was served. "Is that so?" Alexander replied without much interest. "Yes, quite talented. Botanical illustrations of exceptional quality." Alexander's eyes flickered to Sarah. "And yet you work at a diner. Not everyone has the luxury of pursuing their passion as a career," Sarah replied, surprising herself with her steady tone. "I suppose not," he conceded. "What sort of botanical illustrations?" "Medicinal plants, mostly. I've always been interested in natural remedies and their history." Sarah was studying art before financial constraints forced her to leave school, Eleanor added. Alexander's expression remained neutral, but Sarah sensed his assessment shifting slightly. "Where did you study?" he asked. "Millfield Institute of Art and Design. I completed 2 years before... single quotes," she shrugged, unwilling to detail her financial struggles to this man who had probably never worried about money in his life. "Miad has an excellent program," Alexander commented unexpectedly. "Their faculty includes several renowned botanical illustrators." Surprised he knew this, Sarah nodded. "Professor Winters was my advisor. She specialized in scientific illustration." "Evelyn Winters?" "She did the illustrations for a pharmaceutical guide my company published 5 years ago." The conversation shifted, becoming slightly less strained as they discovered this unexpected common ground. Throughout the meal, Sarah noticed Eleanor watching their interaction with a curious expression, almost calculating, though her manner remained unfailingly gracious. As dessert was served, a confection of chocolate and berries that made Sarah's simple pancakes that morning seem childish in comparison, Leonard steered the conversation back to Sarah's rescue. "If Sarah hadn't insisted I come home with her, I might have been in serious trouble," she told Alex. The temperature in my house had already dropped to dangerous level. Alexander's gaze rested on Sarah, more thoughtful than cold now. "You took a significant risk driving in those conditions." "It wasn't a choice," Sarah replied honestly. "I couldn't leave her there. Most people would have," he said simply. "I'm not most people." The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but the closest thing to it she'd seen from him. Apparently not. After dinner, Eleanor excused herself, claiming fatigue from the previous day's adventure. She retired to what was apparently her suite in Alexander's home, leaving Sarah awkwardly alone with her imposing son. "Would you like a tour of the house?" he offered unexpectedly. "Mother mentioned you have an interest in art." Sarah accepted, and for the next half hour, Alexander guided her through rooms filled with museum qualities. His knowledge was impressive, his commentary informed, but not pretentious. In a gallery-like space at the back of the house, Sarah stopped before a framed series of botanical illustrations that looked strikingly familiar. "These are Winter's work," she said, leaning closer to examine the detail. "Yes, part of the same series commissioned for our pharmaceutical guide. You have a good eye." "They're extraordinary," Sarah murmured, studying the technical precision, the delicate use of color. "Your work is similar?" "Mine isn't nearly this refined, but yes, This is the style I aspire to. Alexander studied her for a moment. Would you show me sometime? The question caught Sarah off guard. My illustrations? Why? He seemed equally surprised by his own invitation. Professional curiosity. My company publishes several medical and pharmaceutical references annually. We're always looking for talented illustrators. Sarah wasn't sure whether to laugh or be offended. I'm a waitress you met because I rescued your mother from a blizzard. Now you're suggesting a professional collaboration? Is that so strange? Frankly, yes. A few hours ago, you were trying to pay me off for inconveniencing myself by helping your mother. Alexander had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. I misjudged the situation. And you? Sarah wasn't ready to let him off so easily. Why did you assume I helped your mother for money? Why was that your first instinct? He was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Experience, he finally said. In my world, people rarely do things without expecting something in return. The admission, surprisingly candid, hung in the air between them. Sarah found herself reassessing him, still privileged, still arrogant, but perhaps more complex than she'd initially thought. That's a sad world to live in, she said quietly. His eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, something vulnerable flickered across his face before the composed mask returned. It's getting late, he said, glancing at his watch. Let me have my driver take you home. That's not necessary. I can take the buses have stopped running for the night, he interrupted. Please allow me to ensure you get home safely. I think we've established that Mother would never forgive me if anything happened to her rescuer. Sarah acquiesced, recognizing both the practical truth of his statement and the olive branch it represented. As they returned to the foyer, Eleanor appeared, wrapped in an elegant dressing gown. Leaving so soon, dear? She asked Sarah. I hope Alexander has been a good host. He has, Sarah assured her, surprised to find she meant it. Thank you for dinner. It was lovely. Before you go, Eleanor said, producing a small envelope, a token of my appreciation. Mrs. Donovan, really. It's not money, Eleanor said firmly. Please, just accept. Sarah took the envelope, tucking it into her purse. Alexander watched the exchange with an unreadable expression. Good night, Sarah, Eleanor said, her eyes twinkling with that same mischief Sarah had glimpsed earlier. I have a feeling we'll be seeing each other again very soon. Alexander's driver, a taciturn man named Harris, delivered Sarah to her apartment in a vehicle that cost more than she would earn in a decade. The luxury SUV moved through the snow-clogged streets with an ease her Honda could never manage. She sat in the plush leather back seat, Eleanor's envelope burning a hole in her purse. Only after she was alone in her apartment did Sarah open it. Inside wasn't cash, as she had feared, but a delicate watercolor card. On the front was a beautiful rendering of a snow-covered Victorian house, Eleanor's home. Inside, an elegant script. Asterisk, dear Sarah. Asterisk, asterisk. Some people pass through our lives like shadows, leaving no trace. Others arrive like angels of mercy, precisely when needed. You are the latter. Please visit me for tea tomorrow at 3 o'clock. There's something I would like to discuss with you. Asterisk, asterisk, with deepest gratitude. Asterisk, asterisk, Eleanor Donovan, asterisk. Below the signature was an address, not Alexander's mansion, but Eleanor's Victorian home on Maple Street. Sarah placed the card on her nightstand, puzzled but intrigued. What could Eleanor possibly want to discuss? And why at her home rather than her son? Sleep came fitfully, her dreams filled with enormous mansions where each room led to another more opulent than the last. And she kept getting lost while searching for something she couldn't name. The next morning, Sarah awoke to a text from Mike. Diner reopening at 10 a.m. Roads mostly clear. Can you work noon shift? Sarah confirmed she would be there and spent the morning digging her car out from under its snow blanket. By the time she arrived at Hartwell's, the diner was bustling, filled with customers eager for hot food after being snowbound. Look who's back, Chloe grinned, tying her apron. How was your snow day? Sarah hesitated. How could she possibly explain the last 24 hours? Vengeful, she finally said. Ooh, mysterious. Chloe wiggled her eyebrows. Details later? Maybe. It's complicated. The lunch rush kept them too busy for conversation. Sarah fell into the familiar rhythm of taking orders, delivering food, refilling coffee cups. The mundane normality of it all made her dinner at the Donovan mansion seem like a surreal dream. Around 2 o'clock, as the crowd thinned, Sarah was wiping down a table when the bell above the door chimed. She turned, coffee pot in hand, and nearly dropped it. Alexander Donovan stood in the entrance, looking as out of place in the diner as a wolf in a chicken coop. His tailored overcoat and Italian leather shoes marked him immediately as not their usual clientele. Every head in the place turned. He scanned the room, his eyes finding Sarah with unerring precision. She felt heat rise to her cheeks as he approached. Miss Miller, he nodded in greeting. Mr. Donovan, she replied, acutely aware of Chloe's wide-eyed stare from behind the counter. This is unexpected. I apologize for the intrusion. May I have a moment of your time? Mike appeared from the kitchen, clearly sensing the presence of someone important. Sarah, take your break, he said, his eyes darting between her and Alexander. She led Alexander to a booth in the corner, ironically the same one where Eleanor had been sitting when the blizzard hit. He perched uncomfortably on the vinyl seat, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Coffee? She offered, holding up the pot she still clutched. No, thank you. I won't take much of your time. He placed a sleek leather portfolio on the table. I spoke with Professor Winters this morning. Sarah blinked in surprise. You did? After our conversation last night, I was curious. She remembers you quite well. Speaks very highly of your talent. That's kind of her. Sarah managed, unsure where this was going. Alexander opened the portfolio, revealing a contract. Donovan Pharmaceuticals is developing a new line of plant-based medications. We need accurate, detailed illustrations for the packet, promotional materials, and medical literature. Sarah stared at him. Are you offering me a job? A contract initially. 6 months, with the possibility of extension based on performance. He slid the document toward her. The terms are outlined here. I believe you'll find the compensation ... adequate. Sarah glanced at the figure on the page and had to stifle a gasp. It was more than she made in a year at the diner. Why? She asked, looking up at him. His eyebrows rose slightly. Why what? Why me? You don't know me. You've never seen my work. One conversation with my former professor, and you're offering me a contract worth, she lowered her voice. A small fortune? Alexander's expression remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes. I make quick decisions, Miss Miller. It's how I built my business. Professor Winters vouched for your talent. I have a project that requires someone with your specific skills. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement. Sarah wasn't convinced. It feels like charity. His jaw tightened. I don't do charity, Miss Miller. This is business, because you feel you owe me for helping your mother, because we need a talented botanical illustrator, and you happen to be one. He stood, reaching into his pocket. Here's my card with my direct number. Think about it. Call me with your decision by Friday. Before she could respond, he turned and walked out, leaving the contract on the table. Through the window, she watched him slide into a black luxury sedan that had been waiting at the curb. Holy crap, Chloe breathed, sliding into the seat Alexander had vacated. Was that Alexander Donovan? The Alexander Donovan? What did he want? And how do you know him? Sarah was saved from answering by Mike calling Chloe back to work. She tucked the contract into her bag, her mind reeling. First Eleanor's invitation, now this. What was happening to her orderly, predictable life? The rest of her shift passed in a daze. At precisely 2:30, she hung up her apron and changed into the clean clothes she'd brought for her visit to Eleanor. Her car protested the cold, but eventually started, and she made her way carefully to Maple Street. Eleanor's Victorian home looked different in daylight, still impressive, but less imposing than it had seemed during the blizzard. Power had been restored. Lights glowed warmly behind curtained windows. A security guard discreetly stationed near the gate waved her through after checking her name against a list. The front door opened before she could knock, revealing a petite woman in a housekeeper's uniform. Miss Miller, Mrs. Donovan is expecting you. Please come in. Sarah was led through the grand foyer into a sunlit conservatory at the back of the house. Despite the snow outside, the glass-enclosed room was warm and filled with thriving plants. Eleanor sat in a wicker chair, a tea service arranged on the table beside her. Sarah, my dear, she smiled warmly. Thank you for coming. How lovely you look. Sarah returned the smile, taking the seat Eleanor indicated. Your home is beautiful, Mrs. Donovan, especially this room. The conservatory is my sanctuary, Eleanor said, pouring tea into a delicate porcelain cup. I've always found solace among growing things. Sarah accepted the offered cup, noticing the fine tremor in Eleanor's hand. Are you feeling better today? Much better, thank you. Though Alexander insists I stay with him for a few more days. Her eyes twinkled. He worries, though he'd never admit it. Sarah hesitated, then decided to be direct. Speaking of Alexander, he came to see me at the diner today. Eleanor's eyebrows rose slightly. Did he? How interesting. He offered me a contract as an illustrator for his pharmaceutical company. Ah, Eleanor nodded, not looking particularly surprised. And what did you tell him? Nothing yet. It all seems so ... sudden. And the timing is suspicious right after I helped you. Eleanor set down her teacup. Alexander doesn't make business decisions based on sentiment, believe me. If he offered you a contract, it's because he believes you're the right person for the job. Sarah wasn't convinced. But he's never even seen my work, hasn't he? Eleanor's smile was enigmatic. She reached for a small bell on the table and rang it once. The housekeeper appeared moments later carrying a familiar portfolio, Sarah's portfolio, the one she'd shown Eleanor in her apartment. You left this behind, Eleanor explained as the housekeeper placed it on the table. Alexander brought it when he collected me. He was ... quite impressed. Sarah stared at the portfolio, realization dawning. He saw my work before he spoke to Professor Winters. I may have suggested he look through it, Eleanor admitted, but the decision was entirely his own. Sarah felt a complex mix of emotions, embarrassment that Alexander had seen her amateur efforts, confusion about why Eleanor would intervene, and a small, persistent spark of hope that perhaps her art wasn't as worthless as she'd come to believe. Mrs. Donovan, why did you ask me here today? Eleanor's expression grew serious. I wanted to talk to you privately. Away from Alexander's watchful eye, she leaned forward slightly. There's something I'd like to show you, but I need your word that you won't mention it to my son. Not yet. The request was so unexpected that Sarah could only nod. Eleanor reached into the pocket of her cardigan and withdrew a small object wrapped in velvet. She placed it on the table between them and carefully unfolded the cloth to reveal a golden locket, antique and intricately engraved. This, Eleanor said softly, belonged to my grandmother, and her mother before her. She opened the locket to reveal a miniature painting inside. A botanical illustration of a delicate purple flower, rendered with extraordinary precision. Sarah leaned closer, her artist's eye immediately recognizing the exceptional quality of the work. It's beautiful. What is it? A rare orchid that once grew in the mountains near my ancestral home, Eleanor replied. This locket is just the beginning. There's an entire collection, Sarah, a legacy of botanical art that few have ever seen, and I want you to help me preserve it. Sarah stared at the locket, then at Eleanor. trying to process what she was hearing. A collection? What kind of collection? Eleanor took a sip of tea, gathering her thoughts. My family, my birth family, the Winthrops were botanists and naturalists going back generations. We traveled the world documenting rare and medicinal plants long before photography made such work commonplace. She gestured toward a door at the far end of the conservatory. Through there is my private study. Inside are journals, sketchbooks, and paintings dating back to the early 1800s. Hundreds of detailed illustrations of plants, many of which are now extinct or endangered. That's extraordinary, Sarah breathed. But why show this to me? And why keep it secret from Alex? Eleanor's expression grew more serious. Alexander is a businessman, first and foremost. He sees value in terms of profit and loss. This collection, she touched the locket gently, is priceless in ways he wouldn't understand, at least not yet. She closed the locket and rewrapped it in velvet. I'm getting older, Sarah. My heart isn't what it was. I need someone who appreciates the artistic and scientific value of this collection to help me catalog it properly, to ensure it isn't simply sold off to the highest bidder when I'm gone. But surely Alexander wouldn't. My son is not unkind, Eleanor interrupted gently, but he's practical. Without understanding what these illustrations represent, he would see them as assets to be liquidated, donations to be made for tax purposes. Sarah hesitated. Mrs. Donovan, I'm flattered, but I'm not a curator or an archivist. I'm not even a professional artist anymore. But you could be again, Eleanor said pointedly. Alexander's offer gives you that opportunity. The pieces suddenly clicked into place. You orchestrated that. The contract. Eleanor's smile was neither confirmation nor denial. I merely suggested he'd look at your work. The rest was his decision. Sarah wasn't sure whether to be offended or impressed by the older woman's machinations. So you want me to work for Alexander while secretly helping you preserve this collection? Not exactly secret, just private, for now. I would compensate you separately, of course. It's not about the money, Sarah said automatically. No, Eleanor agreed, studying her. With you, I don't believe it is. She rose from her chair with careful dignity. Come, let me show you what I'm talking about. Sarah followed. Eleanor threw the door into what had once been a formal dining room, now converted into a private study. Bookshelves lined the walls and a large oak table dominated the center. On it lay several leather-bound volumes and archival boxes. Eleanor opened one of the books to reveal page after page of exquisite hand-painted illustrations, plants rendered in vivid detail, with notes in a precise, elegant script documenting location, medicinal properties, and dates of discovery. My great-grandfather's expedition to the Amazon, 1872, Eleanor explained. He discovered several plant compounds that became the basis for modern medications, including treatments for malaria and certain heart conditions. Sarah turned the pages carefully, her artist's eye recognizing the extraordinary skill and precision of the work. These are museum qualities, she murmured. Better than museum quality, Eleanor corrected. Many museums have only copies. These are the originals, with the actual plant samples in some cases. She opened an archival box containing pressed specimen, remarkably preserved despite their age. The Winthrop collection has never been publicly displayed in its entirety, Eleanor continued. Parts have been loaned to universities and research institutions over the years, but always anonymously. Why? Sarah asked, genuinely puzzled. Eleanor's expression turned wistful. My father believed that knowledge should be shared for the common good, not for personal glory. He passed that belief to me. She closed the book gently. But times change. Medical research has become big business. Pharmaceutical companies, including my son's, spend millions developing synthetic versions of compounds that nature has already perfected. That's why you want to preserve this? For the scientific knowledge? For science, yes, but also for art, for history. Eleanor's gaze was intense despite her frail appearance. These illustrations aren't just scientifically accurate. They're works of art that capture the beauty and complexity of plants in ways a photograph never could. Sarah understood. As a botanical illustrator, she knew the difference between a clinical photograph and an illustration that could highlight specific characteristics while capturing the essence of a plant. What exactly would you want me to do? She asked. Help me organize, digitize, and properly catalog everything, Eleanor explained. Create a comprehensive index. And perhaps, she hesitated, add your own work to the collection. The Winthrop tradition has continued through my lifetime, but I fear it may end with me. The implications of what Eleanor was suggesting began to dawn on Sarah. This wasn't just a cataloging job. It was an apprenticeship, a passing of the torch. Mrs. Donovan, this is incredibly generous, but I'm not sure I'm qualified. You have the eye, Eleanor interrupted firmly. The technique can be refined, but the fundamental ability to see a plant, truly see it, that's something you either have or you don't. You have it. Sarah was silent, overwhelmed by the opportunity being presented. After years of believing her artistic dreams were dead, here was a chance not just to create art again, but to contribute to something meaningful, something lasting. There's something else, Eleanor said, moving to a small safe concealed behind a painting. She entered a combination and removed a slim red leather journal. This is my current project, plant compounds with potential applications for cardiovascular treatments. She handed the journal to Sarah, who opened it to find detailed illustrations of plants she didn't recognize. along with chemical formulas and extensive notes. Your heart condition, Sarah realized. You're researching treatments. Eleanor nodded. Traditional medicine dismissed as folklore has often proven more effective than modern pharmaceuticals for my particular condition. I've documented my findings over the past decade. Sarah flipped through the journal, noting the scientific rigor behind the beautiful illustration. Does Alexander know about this research? He knows I dabble in botany, Eleanor said dismissively. He humors me, but he doesn't understand the significance. Donovan Pharmaceuticals focuses on synthetic compounds. The idea that his mother might have valuable research doesn't occur to him. There was a hint of bitterness in her tone that caught Sarah's attention. There's more to this than preserving a family legacy, isn't there? Eleanor studied Sarah for a long moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. My husband, Jonathan, built Donovan Pharmaceuticals from nothing. When he died 20 years ago, the board pushed me out despite my own scientific background. They thought a woman in her 60s was better suited to charity galas than corporate boardrooms. She ran her fingers over one of the illustrations. Alexander was young, ambitious. They molded him in their image. By the time he gained enough control to make his own decisions, the company's direction was set. You want to prove them wrong, Sarah guessed. Show that your research has value. I want to help people, Eleanor corrected gently. And yes, perhaps I want some recognition for the Winthrop legacy before I die. Is that so terrible? Sarah thought about her own abandoned dreams, the spark of creativity that had never quite died despite years of suppression. No, she said softly. It's not terrible at all. Eleanor smiled, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. So, will you help me? Before Sarah could answer, they heard the distinct sound of the front door opening, followed by a familiar, authoritative voice calling, "Mother, are you home?" Eleanor quickly returned the red journal to the safe, closing it just as Alexander's footsteps approached the conservatory. Remember, she whispered urgently to Sarah. Not a word about this. Not yet, Sarah nodded, her mind racing with the implications of what she'd just learned and the choice she now faced. Alexander Donovan was offering her a chance to return to the art world, while his mother was offering something potentially more significant, a secret legacy that could change lives. As Alexander appeared in the doorway, Sarah realized her simple life had become anything but simple in the span of just 3 days. Alexander paused in the doorway of the conservatory, his expression shifting from surprise to careful neutrality at finding Sarah there. "Ms. Miller, I didn't realize you were here." Eleanor smoothly stepped forward. "I invited Sarah for tea to thank her properly. We've been having a lovely chat about botanical illustration." Alexander's gaze moved between them, assessing. "I see. Have you had a chance to review the contract?" "I've looked at it," Sarah replied. "It's generous. Very generous." "It's commensurate with the work required," he said, his tone strictly professional. Eleanor smiled. "Sarah was just telling me about your offer. How thoughtful of you to recognize her talent." Alexander straightened his shoulders slightly, uncomfortable with the praise. "It's a business decision. Professor Winters spoke highly of her abilities, and we have a project that requires her specific expertise." "Still," Eleanor pressed, "it's fortuitous timing." The look Alexander gave his mother carried a hint of suspicion, but he said nothing more about it. Instead, he turned to Sarah. "Have you decided?" Sarah hesitated, feeling caught between mother and son, each offering her a different path. "I'm still considering it. The change would be significant." "Of course," he nodded. "You have until Friday." He turned to Eleanor. "Mother, Dr. Lansing called. Your appointment has been moved to tomorrow morning." "Oh dear," Eleanor sighed. "That means I'll miss my garden club meeting. I'm sure they'll survive without you," Alexander said dryly. Sarah sensed her cue to leave. "I should be going. Thank you for the tea, Mrs. Donovan." "Please call me Eleanor," the older woman insisted, taking Sarah's hands in her own. "And think about what we discussed. It would mean a great deal to me." Sarah nodded, acutely aware of Alexander watching this exchange with thinly veiled curiosity. "I'll walk you out," he said unexpectedly. They moved through the grand house in silence until they reached the front door. There, Alexander paused. "My mother seems quite taken with you," he observed. Sarah wasn't sure how to respond. "She's a remarkable woman." "Yes, she is," he agreed, his expression softening momentarily, though sometimes her enthusiasm can be overwhelming. "What do you mean?" Alexander chose his words carefully. "Mother tends to adopt people she finds interesting. She can be quite persuasive. I wouldn't want you to feel obligated to indulge her out of gratitude or politeness." The warning was subtle but clear. Sarah wondered exactly how much he suspected about their conversation. "Eleanor has been nothing but kind to me," she said neutrally. "Of course." His tone remained even, but something flickered in his eyes. "About the contract, it's a legitimate offer, regardless of my mother's interest in you. I hope you understand that." "I do," Sarah nodded, "and I appreciate the opportunity." "Good." He opened the door for her. "If you have any questions about the terms, call me directly. Don't rely on my mother's interpretation of legal documents." The wry humor in his voice surprised her. "Experience speaking? Let's just say Mother has her own understanding of contractual obligations." This unexpected glimpse of warmth, the real person beneath the imposing businessman facade, caught Sarah off guard. She found herself smiling in response. "I'll keep that in mind." 3 days later, Sarah found herself in the imposing headquarters of Donovan Pharmaceuticals, being led through security protocols and orientation procedures. She had signed the contract, unable to refuse such an opportunity both for her art and for the chance to help Eleanor with with her secret collection. The terms were even more favorable than she'd initially realized. The contract included flexible hours that would allow her to spend time at Eleanor's house cataloging the Winthrop collection, while still fulfilling her obligations to the company. Her new workspace was nothing like the cramped corner of her apartment where she'd been drawing. The studio provided by Donovan Pharmaceuticals featured north-facing windows for perfect natural light, ergonomic furniture, and state-of-the-art equipment. For the first time in years, Sarah felt like a professional artist again. Her supervisor, Dr. Lillian Chun, was a brilliant pharmacologist with a deep appreciation for the role of botanical illustration and scientific documentation. Your first assignment, Dr. Chun explained, spreading reference materials across the workspace, is to create detailed illustrations of these 5 plant specimens. They're being studied for a new cardiovascular medication. Sarah examined the plants and froze. She recognized them immediately from Eleanor's red journal. These were the exact same species the older woman had been researching for her heart condition. Is something wrong? Dr. Chun asked, noticing her reaction. No, Sarah recovered quickly, just surprised by the coincidence. I'm familiar with some of these plants. That's an advantage then, Dr. Chun smiled. The project lead will be pleased. Who is the project lead? Sarah asked, already suspecting the answer. Alexander Donovan himself. This research line is his personal priority. The pieces began falling into place in Sarah's mind. Alexander was pursuing research that paralleled his mother's work, perhaps without even realizing it. The coincidence seemed too perfect to be accidental. Had Eleanor orchestrated this too? Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah settled into a carefully balanced routine. Mornings at Donovan Pharmaceuticals, creating the detailed illustrations Dr. Chun required. Afternoons at Eleanor's Victorian house, cataloging the Winthrop collection and learning the history behind each piece. Eleanor proved to be a patient teacher, sharing techniques that had been passed down through generations of botanical artists. Under her guidance, Sarah's work improved dramatically, a fact noticed by Dr. Chun and the research team. Your illustrations capture details our photographers missed, Dr. Chun commented one morning, examining Sarah's rendering of a rare flowering vine. Alexander was right about you. The mention of Alexander made Sarah glance up. She had seen little of him since starting work, though she sometimes felt his presence in the building, an awareness that prickled along her spine when he was near. He's been following your progress, Doctor, Chun added, misinterpreting Sarah's reaction. He reviews all the illustrations personally. Sarah didn't know how to feel about that. Flattered by his professional interest, or concerned that he might recognize similarities between her work for the company and the techniques she was learning from Eleanor. The dual nature of her position grew increasingly complicated. Eleanor's research on natural compounds for her heart condition paralleled, in some ways surpassed, the work being done at Donovan Pharmaceuticals. Yet the older woman remained adamant that her son not be told about the Winthrop collection or her own research until she deemed the time right. He needs to see the value first, Eleanor insisted one afternoon as they carefully photographed pages from a 19th century expedition journal. Alexander respects results, not sentimentality, but your research could help people, Sarah argued gently. Isn't that more important than proving a point? Eleanor's expression soft. Of course it is, dear, but timing matters. Present too soon and it will be dismissed as an old woman's hobby. Present with evidence, with your beautiful illustrations documenting the results, and even Alexander will have to take notice. Sarah wasn't entirely convinced, but she respected Eleanor's wishes. Still, keeping such significant secrets from Alexander grew increasingly difficult, especially as she began to see more of him at the company. Sometimes he would appear in her studio unannounced, looking over her work with keen, knowledgeable eyes. Their conversations remained professional but gradually warmed as he recognized her genuine passion for the work. You seem at home here, he observed one evening, finding her still working long after most employees had left, more so than at the diner. Sarah looked up from the detailed cross-section she was rendering. I'd forgotten how much I love this, creating something that's both beautiful and useful. He studied her for a moment. You're different from what I expected. What did you expect? Someone looking for advancement, connections. Most people who get close to my mother have an agenda. The irony of his statement wasn't lost on Sarah given her secret work with Eleanor, but her motivations weren't what he implied. Maybe some people just enjoy her company, she suggested. She's fascinating. Alexander's expression remained unreadable. Yes, she is, and a much better judge of character than I gave her credit for. The compliment, oblique as it was, brought heat to Sarah's cheeks. Before she could respond, his phone buzzed. He checked it, his expression immediately hardening. Excuse me, he said, all business again. There's an issue I need to address. After he left, Sarah sat back, torn between her growing respect for Alexander as a businessman and her loyalty to Eleanor's confidence. The secret work, the parallel research, the Winthrop collection, all of it seemed destined to collide eventually. And Sarah, once a simple waitress, now found herself at the center of a complex situation involving one of the city's most powerful families. She just hoped that when the truth inevitably emerged, she wouldn't lose everything she was gradually rebuilding: her art, her confidence, and and the unexpected connections she'd formed with both Donovans. 1 month into her new position at Donovan Pharmaceuticals, Sarah found herself facing an unexpected dilemma. Dr. Chun had called her into a meeting with the research team to discuss the progress on the cardiovascular medication project. "Your illustrations have been invaluable, Doctor," Chun said, gesturing to Sarah's detailed renderings displayed on the conference room wall. "You've captured characteristics that have helped us isolate several promising compounds." "Thanks," Sarah replied, uncomfortable with the praise given what she knew from Ellen. Dr. Harris, the lead chemist, pointed to one of the illustrations, flowering vine with distinctive red veins running through its. "We're focusing on this specimen in particular. The compound extracted from its root bark shows remarkable promise in initial testing." Sarah nodded, keeping her expression neutral. This was the exact plant Eleanor had highlighted in her journal as having the most potential for treating her specific heart condition. The older woman had been experimenting with different extraction methods, documenting the results meticulously. "There's just one challenge, Doctor," Chun continued. "Our extraction process is yielding inconsistent results. We're getting the compound, but its potency varies significantly between batches. Have you tried a cold press method with an alcohol base?" The words slipped out before Sarah could stop them. The room fell silent. Every scientist turned to look at her. "I mean," she backpedaled quickly, "I've read that some plant compounds are heat sensitive. Cold extraction might preserve the molecular integrity better." Dr. Harris's eyebrows rose. "That's actually a sound hypothesis. Where did you read this?" Sarah's mind raced. "Just some old botanical texts I've been studying to improve my illustrations. Understanding traditional methods helps me visualize the plants better." It wasn't entirely a lie. She had learned about extraction techniques from Eleanor's journal, just not the published kind. "Interesting," a voice said from the doorway. Alexander stood there, arms crossed, expression unreadable. How long had he been listening? "Miss Miller, may I see you in my office when this meeting concludes?" Sarah's stomach dropped. Of course. The meeting continued, but Sarah heard little of it, her mind spinning with possibilities. Had she revealed too much? Would Alexander connect her knowledge to his mother's research? When the scientist finally filed out, Sarah gathered her courage and made her way to Alexander's corner office on the top floor. His assistant waved her in immediately. The office was exactly what she expected. Minimalist, elegant, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. Alexander stood looking out at the skyline, his back to her. "Close the door, please," he said without turning around. Sarah did as instructed, heart pounding. "Mr. Donovan, about the meeting. You've been spending a lot of time with my mother," he interrupted, finally facing her. His expression wasn't angry as she'd feared, but intensely curious. "Almost daily, according to my security staff." Of course he would know. The guards at Eleanor's gate reported to him. "She's been teaching me about botanical illustration," Sarah said carefully. "Traditional techniques that aren't taught in art schools anymore. Just illustration." His gaze was penetrating, as if he could see the half-truth in her words. "Mostly," she hedged. "She also shares stories about the plants, their history, traditional uses." Alexander nodded slowly, "Including extraction methods for bioactive compounds." Sarah swallowed hard. This was it, the moment of reckoning she'd been dreading. "Mr. Donovan, Alexander," he corrected gently. "I think we're past formalities at this point, don't you?" The unexpectedly personal tone threw her off balance. "Alexander," she amended, "your mother has been generous with her knowledge. She's passionate about botanical history. My mother," he said with a wry smile, "has never done anything without purpose in her entire life." He gestured for Sarah to sit in one of the chairs facing his desk. "She's using you to get to me, you know." Sarah blinked in surprise. "I don't think that's not in a malicious way," he clarified, taking his own seat. "But mother has been trying to get me to look at her research for years. I've been ... dismissive." "Why?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious. Alexander sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, a surprisingly human gesture from someone who always seemed so controlled. "After my father died, the board pushed her out of any meaningful role in the company. She was brilliant, is brilliant, but they saw only an aging widow, not a scientist." His expression darkened with something like regret. "I was young, ambitious. I should have fought harder for her, but I was busy proving myself. By the time I had enough influence to change things, she had retreated into her private research, refusing to share it with the company." "Maybe she felt betrayed," Sarah suggested gently. "Perhaps," he acknowledged. "Or maybe she wanted to prove she could succeed without the company's resources." He leaned forward. "Which brings me to you, Sarah. What exactly has my mother shown you?" The directness of the question demanded an equally direct answer. Sarah took a deep breath. "The Winthrop collection," she said simply. Alexander's eyes widened slightly. The first time she'd seen him truly surprised. "She showed you the collection? All of it?" "Most of it, I think. It's extensive." He let out a low whistle. "She must trust you implicitly." "I haven't been allowed to see the full collection since I was a child." This revelation stunned Sarah. "Do you know about it?" "Of course I know about it. The Winthrop botanical legacy. It's family history." His expression softened with something like nostalgia. "Mother used to tell me stories about my great-great-grandfather's expedition, show me the illustration. But after the conflict with the board, she locked it all away. Said it was her heritage, not Donovan Pharmaceuticals." Sarah struggled to reconcile this with Eleanor's secrecy. "She told me you didn't understand its significance." "What I understand," Alexander said carefully, "is that my mother possesses one of the most comprehensive private collections of botanical research in existence. What I don't understand is why she refuses to let it benefit people through proper scientific channels." channel. She thinks you'd just commercialize it, Sarah said before she could stop herself. To her surprise, Alexander laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his face. Of course I would. That's how research becomes medication that helps people, but not without giving her full credit, full control. He shook his head. Contrary to what Mother believes, I'm not the enemy of her legacy. I'm trying to preserve it in my own way. Sarah sat back, processing this revelation. Mother and son, both brilliant, both stubborn, both convinced they were protecting the Winthrop legacy in the right way. The cold press extraction method, Alexander said, returning to business. That came from her research, didn't it? Sarah nodded, seeing no point in denial. It's a good technique. We'll try it. He studied her for a moment. You're in an awkward position, aren't you? Loyal to my mother, but also committed to your work here. It's clit, Sarah admitted. Doesn't have to be. Alexander stood, pacing near the windows. I have a proposal. Continue working with Mother on the collection. Learn everything she's willing to teach you. But share with me anything that could help our research, specific thing related to the cardiovascular project. Sarah frowned. That feels like betraying her confidence. Is it betrayal to help her research reach its full potential? To give her techniques the scientific validation they deserve? He turned to face her fully. Sarah, my mother is brilliant, but she's working alone with limited resources. Here we have a full research team, clinical trial capabilities, manufacturing infrastructure. His logic was persuasive, but Sarah still hesitated. Why not just talk to her directly? Tell her you value her research. Alexander's expression clouded. I've tried, many times. She doesn't trust the company. Doesn't trust me with her precious Winthrop legacy. He sighed. Our relationship is complicated. That much was evident. Sarah thought of the elegant Victorian house filled with treasures and the lonely woman who guarded them so fiercely. I won't spy on your mother, she said firmly, but I will encourage her to share her research with you, to give you a chance to prove she can trust you with it. Alexander considered this, then nodded slowly. Fair enough. He extended his hand. Partners in reconciliation. Then Sarah shook his hand, feeling the warmth and strength of his grip. Partners. As she left his office, Sarah felt the weight of her promise. She had committed to something far more complex than cataloging botanical illustrations. She had positioned herself as a bridge between two brilliant but wounded people who had spent 20 years talking past each other. She just hoped she wasn't setting herself up for disaster when Eleanor discovered she'd revealed the secret of the Winthrop collection to Alexander. Eleanor was waiting for Sarah in the conservatory when she arrived that afternoon. Freshly brewed tea and a selection of delicate pastries arranged on the table. You're late, the older woman observed, though her tone held no reproach. I was beginning to worry. Sarah set her portfolio down carefully. I was called into a meeting about the cardiovascular project. Eleanor poured tea into 2 china cups. And how's that progressing? The casual question carried weight. Sarah took a seat, considering her approach. They're making progress, she said cautiously, focusing on that flowering vine with the red-veined leaves. Eleanor's hand paused minutely as she passed Sarah her tea. The Carenia latifolia asterisk. I'm not surprised. It's the most promising of the specimen. They're having trouble with the extraction process, Sarah continued, watching Eleanor's reaction closely. Inconsistent results. A smile flickered at the corners of Eleanor's mouth. Cold press extraction with an alcohol base would solve that problem. I may have mentioned that possibility, Sarah admitted. Eleanor's eyes widened. Did you now? And how did they receive this suggestion from their illustrator? With surprise and interest. Sarah took a deep breath. Alexander asked to see me privately afterward. The teacup froze halfway to Eleanor's lips. I see. She set it down carefully. And what did my son have to say? He knows I've been spending time here. He asked what you've been teaching me. Single quotes. Sarah met Eleanor's gaze directly. I told him about the Winthrop collection. Eleanor's face went perfectly still. For a terrible moment, Sarah feared she had irreparably damaged their relationship. Then, unexpectedly, Eleanor laughed, a soft musical sound. Well, that saves me considerable trouble. Sarah blinked in confusion. You're not upset, my dear girl? I've been trying to find a way to reintroduce Alexander to the collection for years. Eleanor's eyes twinkled with that mischievous light Sarah had come to recognize. You've simply accelerated my timeline, but you told me to keep it secret. From Alexander, yes, until the right moment. Eleanor sipped her tea. Tell me, what was his reaction? Sarah recounted the conversation, watching Eleanor's expression shift from amusement to thoughtfulness. He says he values your research, Sarah finished, that he wants to give it the scientific validation it deserves. Of course he does, Eleanor murmured. Alexander has always believed in institutional validation. Papers, patents, clinical trials. She shook her head. The Winthrop way was always more ... immediate. Find a plant that heals, document it, share the knowledge. No patents, no proprietary formulation. He mentioned that too. That commercialization is how research reaches people who need it. Eleanor considered this. He's not entirely wrong. The world has changed since my father's time. She set down her cup with sudden decision. What else did Alexander say? That your relationship is complicated. A soft, sad smile crossed Eleanor's face. Yes, that's one word for it. She rose from her chair with careful dignity. Come with me. There's something else I need to show you. Sarah followed Eleanor deeper into the house, past the study where they usually worked, down a corridor she had never explored. They stopped before a heavy oak door that Eleanor unlocked with an old-fashioned key from her pocket. Inside was a small, intimate room lined with bookshelves. But unlike the study with its scientific tomes, these shelves held photo albums, scrapbooks, and personal journals, a family archive rather than a scientific one. Eleanor crossed to a cabinet and removed a leather-bound album. She opened it on a small reading table, beckoning Sarah closer. "My husband Jonathan," she explained, pointing to a photograph of a distinguished man in his 50s. The same man from the photo Eleanor had brought to Sarah's apartment during the blizzard. Brilliant, driven. He built Donovan Pharmaceuticals from a small research lab into a global company. She turned the page to a photo of a much younger Eleanor in a laboratory, pipette in hand, serious concentration on her face. "I wasn't just Jonathan's wife, I was his research partner. My Winthrop knowledge of botanical compounds complemented his expertise in chemical synthesis." Another page. Eleanor and Jonathan accepting an award, their names listed as co-researchers. "We were a team," Eleanor continued softly. "Till his heart attack 23 years ago." She turned to a newspaper clipping. "Pharmaceutical pioneer Jonathan Donovan suffers massive heart attack." The article detailed his condition, described as grave. "The doctor said he would die," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the painful memory. "Conventional treatments weren't working, so I turned to my family legacy." The next page showed a much thinner, frailer Jonathan in a hospital bed, but alive, with a young man beside him, Alexander, Sarah realized, in his early 20s, looking shell-shocked but relieved. "I created a compound based on Winthrop research plants known for their cardiovascular properties. It stabilized him, gave him 2 more years." Eleanor's fingers traced the photograph gently, but the board was horrified. "Duster botanicals, folk medicine, not scientifically valid. They blocked my efforts to research it further within the company. That's why you continue your research privately," Sarah realized. Eleanor nodded. "After Jonathan died, they effectively removed me from any meaningful role." Alexander was just 25, grieving, vulnerable. "They molded him into their image of a proper pharmaceutical executive. Science, they said, not folklore." This story explained so much of Eleanor's secrecy. Her determination to validate her research on her own terms, the tension between mother and son. "Alexander believes I blame him for not fighting harder for my place in the company," Eleanor continued, turning more pages that chronicled her gradual removal from Donovan Pharmaceuticals' public image. "The truth is more complicated. I was angry, yes, hurt, but I understood the impossible position he was in." "Have you ever told him this?" Sarah asked gently. Eleanor closed the album. "We Donovans are not particularly skilled at expressing our feelings," she admitted with a self-deprecating smile. "It became easier to retreat to my research, to prove I was right in my own way. And the cardiovascular project Alexander is leading now. Ironic, isn't it?" Eleanor's expression was difficult to read. "After all these years, he's investigating the same plants I used to extend his father's life. Plants he dismissed as unscientific when I first suggested them." Sarah understood the full weight of the situation. This wasn't just about scientific research or family legacy. It was about grief, missed opportunities for reconciliation, and 2 brilliant people too stubborn to bridge the gap between them. "Eleanor," she said carefully, "I think Alexander is trying to reach out in the only way he knows who, through the work. The cardiovascular project isn't just another pharmaceutical development to him. It's personal." Eleanor was silent for a long moment, her gaze distant. "Perhaps," she finally conceded, "but 20 years is a long time to wait for an apology." "Maybe he's been waiting for one too," Sarah suggested. The older woman's eyes sharpened. "You've grown quite insightful about my son in a short time." Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I'm just observing the situation." Eleanor hummed noncommittally, but her expression had softened. "Well, what's done is done. You've told Alexander about the collection. Now we must decide what happens next. He wants to see your research on the extraction process," Sarah said. "I think this could be an opportunity to work together again on equal terms." Eleanor replaced the album in the cabinet, her movements deliberate. "Equal terms," she repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, that would be the only acceptable arrangement." She turned to Sarah, sudden determination in her eyes. "Tell Alexander I'm willing to meet. Here in my home with my research on my terms, I will," Sarah promised, relieved that her revelation hadn't destroyed Eleanor's trust. "And Sarah," Eleanor added, her voice gentler, "thank you for seeing what neither of us could or would for far too long." As Sarah left the Victorian house that evening, she felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. She had become the unlikely bridge between mother and son, between traditional knowledge and modern science, between past wounds and possible reconciliation. She just hoped she was strong enough to bear the weight of their expectations. Alexander's reaction to Eleanor's invitation was carefully measured. "My mother is willing to share her research? Just like that?" Sarah sat across from him in his office, afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. "Not exactly, just like that. She has conditions. The meeting must be at her house with her research on her terms." He leaned back in his chair, expression thoughtful. "And you facilitated this breakthrough?" "I just helped you both see what you already knew," Sarah shrugged. "That you're working toward the same goal from different directions." 20 years, Alexander murmured, almost to himself. 20 years of working in parallel rather than together. "It's not too late to change that," Sarah said gently. His eyes met hers with unexpected warmth. "No, I suppose it isn't." He checked his calendar. "Tomorrow afternoon, I'll clear my schedule. I'll let Eleanor know." As Sarah turned to leave, Alexander called after her. Sarah, she paused at the door. Thank you for seeing what we couldn't or wouldn't. The words echoed Eleanor so precisely that Sarah smiled. You're more alike than either of you realized. The next day arrived with nervous anticipation. Sarah reached Eleanor's Victorian home early to help prepare. The older woman had arranged for the conservatory to be transformed, the usual tea table, replaced by a larger one covered with neatly organized research journals, botanical specimens, and scientific equipment. You've created a laboratory, Sarah observed. Presentation matters, Eleanor replied, adjusting a microscope. Alexander respects data, methodology, precision. She was dressed more formally than usual, in a tailored suit that reminded Sarah she had once been not just a researcher but an exec. Are you nervous? Sarah asked. Eleanor's hands stilled. Terrified, she admitted with a soft laugh. Ridiculous, isn't it? I've presented research to Nobel laureates, yet the prospect of showing my work to my own son ties my stomach in knots. Sarah understood. This wasn't just a scientific presentation. It was an attempt at reconciliation with 20 years of hurt and misunderstanding at stake. When Alexander arrived precisely at 2 o'clock, the atmosphere in the house crackled with tension. He entered the conservatory looking every inch the CEO in a perfectly tailored suit carrying a leather portfolio. But Sarah noticed the slight hesitation in his step. The way his eyes sought his mother's was something like uncertainty. Mother, he greeted Eleanor formally. Alexander, she replied with equal formality. Thank you for coming. Sarah felt suddenly intrusive. Perhaps I should give you both privacy. No, mother and son said simultaneously, then exchanged surprised glances. Please stay, Eleanor continued. You're part of this now. Alexander nodded in agreement. You're the bridge that made this meeting possible. The acknowledgement from both of them warmed Sarah unexpectedly. She took a seat slightly removed from the table, prepared to observe more than participate. Eleanor began by explaining her research methodology, her voice growing stronger and more confident as she detailed the extraction techniques she had developed for the *Carenia latifolia* and related species. Alexander listened intently, occasionally asking pointed questions that revealed his own deep knowledge of botanical pharmacology. As the presentation continued, Sarah watched the dynamic between them shift subtly. The initial stiffness gradually softened into professional respect, then into something more personal, a shared passion for the science itself. Your extraction method is remarkably effective, Alexander acknowledged, examining data from Eleanor's experiments. Our lab results show only 62% of the potency you've achieved. Eleanor's eyes lit up. The key is in the timing. The compounds begin degrading within minutes of harvest. Traditional pharmaceutical approaches often miss the window. That's always been the challenge with botanical sources, Alexander. Consistency, reproducibility, not insurmountable challenges, Eleanor countered. Just ones that require a different approach than synthetic compounds. They bent their heads together over a microscope, examining a slide Eleanor had prepared. For a moment they looked not like estranged mother and son, but like colleagues, collaborators, what they should have been all along. Then Alexander straightened, his expression shifting back to something more guarded. This research is remarkable, mother, but to be implemented at scale, it would need rigorous clinical trials, regulatory approval, the institutional validation you've always prioritized, Eleanor interrupted, a hint of the old bitterness creeping into her voice. Because without it, we can't help people, Alexander replied, his own tone hardening. Brilliant research in private notebooks doesn't save lives. Neither does research locked behind patents so expensive that those who need it most can't access it, Eleanor shot back. And just like that, the fragile rapport fractured. Sarah watched in dismay as the conversation devolved into the same old argument, science versus tradition, commerce versus accessibility. The Winthrop approach was always to share knowledge freely, Eleanor said, color rising in her cheeks. Your father understood that before the board filled his head with profit projections and shareholder value. Alexander's jaw tightened. My father built a company that has helped millions of people. That's his legacy, a legacy they used to push me out when he was gone. The raw pain in Eleanor's voice hung in the air between. Alexander looked as though he'd been struck. I didn't have the power to stop them, he said quietly. I was 25, grieving, and they controlled the board. You could have tried harder, Eleanor whispered. I did try. For the first time, Alexander's carefully controlled facade cracked completely. Every board meeting for 3 years, I argued for your research division to continue. They threatened to remove me too if I didn't get with the program. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration Sarah had seen only once before. By the time I gained enough control to make changes, you had withdrawn completely, refused my calls, my visits. Eleanor stared at him, shock evident on her face. I never knew. You never asked, Alexander replied, the hurt of decades evident in his voice. You just assumed I sided with them against you. Sarah watched mother and son regard each other across a gulf of misunderstanding and unspoken words. 20 years of assumptions, of pride, of parallel grief. I think, Sarah said quietly, breaking the tense silence, you both need to stop fighting the old battles and focus on what matters now. They turned to her, momentarily startled, as if they had forgotten her presence. The research, she continued, gesturing to the table between them. The plants. The people who could be helped. Isn't that more important than who was right 20 years ago? Eleanor looked at the scattered papers, the botanical specimens, the careful notes representing decades of work. She's right. she admitted softly. The science is what matters. Alexander studied his mother, really seeing her perhaps for the first time in years, not as an opponent or a reminder of past failures, but as a brilliant scientist with valuable contributions to make. We could do this together, he said tentatively. Combine your botanical expertise with our clinical resources. Full partnership, your name on everything. The Winthrop Donovan Cardiovascular Initiative. The hyphenated name hung in the air between them, an acknowledgement of both legacies, both contributions. Eleanor's eyes glistened with unexpected tears. Jonathan would have liked that, she said quietly. He always believed science should unite, not divide. Alexander swallowed hard, emotion briefly visible on his usually composed face. Yes, he did. They weren't fully reconciled too many years, and Hertz stood between them for that to happen in a single afternoon. But Sarah could see the first tentative bridge being built across the chasm that had separated them for so long. As they began discussing specifics of how to integrate Eleanor's research with Donovan Pharmaceuticals' resources, Sarah slipped quietly from the room, giving them the privacy they needed to rebuild their relationship. Her part in this story, she thought, was nearly complete, but as she gathered her things to leave, she found Alexander waiting for her in the foyer. Leaving without saying goodbye? He asked, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. You and Eleanor have a lot to discuss, she replied. I didn't want to intrude. You're not an intrusion, Sarah. He stepped closer, the professional mask completely gone now. You're the catalyst that made all of this possible. The intensity of his gaze made her heart beat faster. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. No. He shook his head. You were exactly where you were meant to be, in a diner during a blizzard, refusing to leave an elderly woman stranded. His expression was open, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. Some people would call that fate. Before Sarah could respond, Eleanor's voice called from the conservatory, and the moment between them suspended, unresolved. Mother needs me, Alexander said, regret evident in his tone. But this conversation isn't over. There's more I want to say to you. As he returned to Eleanor, Sarah left the Victorian house with her mind swirling. The Donovan family drama was resolving, but her own place in their story suddenly seemed less clear than ever. 3 months after the breakthrough meeting between Eleanor and Alexander, Sarah found herself standing in a gleaming new laboratory at Donovan Pharmaceuticals. The sign on the door read Winthrop Donovan Botanical Research Division, and beneath it, in smaller letters, Eleanor Winthrop Donovan, Director. The space hummed with activity scientists examining plant specimens, technicians operating specialized equipment, and in the center of it all, Eleanor herself, silver hair elegantly styled, dressed in a lab coat over a tailored suit, directing the team with the confidence of someone finally back where she belonged. The extraction is still showing inconsistency in batches larger than 50 ml, she was explaining to a younger researcher. Try reducing the alcohol concentration by 3% and extending the cold press time. Sarah smiled, remembering the timid suggestions she'd made in that research meeting months ago. Now Eleanor's methods were being implemented throughout the company, with promising results already documented in preliminary trials. Quite a change, isn't it? Alexander's voice came from behind her. Sarah turned to find him watching his mother with undisguised pride. For both of you, Sarah observed. Alexander nodded thoughtfully. We're still finding our way. 20 years of miscommunication doesn't disappear overnight, but we're really talking for the first time since my father died. Sarah had witnessed this gradual healing over the weeks since that first tense meeting. Mother and son still disagreed, sometimes heatedly, but now they listened to each other. The shared goal of developing effective plant-based cardiovascular treatments had given them common ground on which to rebuild their relationship. And the Winthrop collection? Sarah asked. Being properly digitized and archived, Alexander replied. Mother has agreed to make it accessible to researchers worldwide with appropriate protections for indigenous knowledge and source communities. Of course, this had been one of Eleanor's non-negotiable conditions, that the collection would benefit humanity, not just Donovan Pharmaceuticals' bottom line. Alexander had surprised everyone by not just accepting these terms, but embracing, establishing a foundation to protect and share the Winthrop botanical legacy. You've accomplished so much in such a short time, Sarah marveled. Alexander's expression softened as he looked at her. None of it would have happened without you. The warmth in his voice made her pulse quicken, as it had increasingly over the past months. Their professional relationship had gradually evolved into something more personal, inners, that extended beyond discussions of work, conversations that touched on dreams and fears rather than just botanical compounds. I just helped you both see what was already there, Sarah demurred. You did far more than that. He glanced at his watch. Speaking of which, we should leave now if we're going to make our reservation. Tonight was significant, the official celebration of the new research division's launch, a dinner with the company's board members and key research. Sarah had been invited not just as the division's lead illustrator, but as Alexander's guest. I just need to say goodbye to Eleanor, Sarah said. She found the older woman bent over a microscope, making notes with the precision that characterized all her work. We're heading out, Sarah told her. Are you sure you won't join us for dinner? Eleanor looked up with a smile. And watch a room full of board members try to pretend they always supported my research? No thank you. She patted Sarah's hand. You and Alexander go. Enjoy your evening. This is where I'm happiest up, single quotes. Sarah understood. For Eleanor, the validation that mattered most wasn't in formal dinners or public recognition, but in seeing her life's work finally taken seriously, her methods implemented, her knowledge respected. Don't work too late, Sarah cautioned. I won't, Eleanor promised. Dr. Chun is driving me home at 8. We're comparing notes on some promising results. The easy collaboration between Eleanor and Dr. Chun was another positive development. Two brilliant women from different scientific traditions finding common ground in their shared passion for healing. As Sarah and Alexander left the building, the spring evening greeted them with gentle warmth and the scent of blooming flowers. They walked to his waiting car in comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Penny for your thoughts? Alexander asked as the car merged into traffic. Sarah smiled. I was thinking about that night during the blizzard. How different my life was. Serving coffee at the corner booth, he nodded. I was good at that job, she said without regret. It wasn't what I dreamed of, but it was honest work. You were good at it, Alexander agreed. You still are. Sarah looked at him questioningly. Being kind, he clarified. Seeing people, really seeing them, helping without expectation of return. Those qualities aren't profession-specific. The observation touched her. Thank you for seeing that. They arrived at Hartwell's. Not the diner where they'd first encountered each other, but an upscale restaurant owned by the same family. The maître d' led them to a private dining room where the board members and research team were already gathered. The dinner unfolded with speeches celebrating the new research division, toasts to Eleanor's contributions, and optimistic projections about the cardiovascular treatments already in development. Sarah watched Alexander move through the room with easy confidence, no longer the cold, suspicious man who had tried to pay her off for helping his mother. Later, as the evening was winding down, Tanner excused them both and suggested a walk through the nearby botanical gardens, still open for a spring exhibition of night-blooming flowers. Under a canopy of stars and illuminated exotic blooms, he finally said the words she'd sensed were coming. I've never believed in fate, he began, his usual confident tone softened by vulnerability. Business, science, progress, these are built on decisions and actions, not destiny. Sarah waited, sensing there was more, but then a snowstorm strands my mother in a diner, and the one person who helps her turns out to be not just kind, but precisely the bridge we needed between art and science, between tradition and innovation, between mother and son. He took her hands in his. If that's not fate, I don't know what is. Maybe it's just human connection, Sarah suggested gently. Seeing each other as people first, not as roles or positions. Whatever it is, Alexander said, his eyes never leaving hers. I don't want it to end. The kiss, when it came, felt inevitable, not because of fate or destiny, but because two people had chosen to see beyond their initial impressions, to grow together through understanding and respect. 1 year to the day after the blizzard that had changed everything, Sarah returned to the corner booth diner. Not as a waitress this time, but as a customer, accompanied by Eleanor and Alexander. Mike had been surprised but pleased by her call, requesting their best corner table for a special occasion. He'd even had the booth reupholstered for the event. It feels strange sitting on this side of the counter, Sarah admitted as they settled into the booth. Good strange or bad strange? Alexander asked, his hand finding hers under the table. Different strange, she decided, like everything this past year. Eleanor looked elegant as always, though her health had improved significantly since starting on the treatment developed through the Winthrop-Donovan collaboration. A treatment now in final clinical trials, showing remarkable results for patients with her specific heart condition. I've been thinking, Eleanor said, spreading her napkin on her lap, about circles, how life brings us back to important places in new ways. Chloe approached their table, coffee pot in hand, her eyes widening in recognition. Sarah and the Donovans. She composed herself quickly. Welcome to the corner booth. What can I get you started with? Earl Grey tea with a splash of milk, no sugar, Eleanor requested with a smile. Coffee black, Alexander added. Hot chocolate with whipped cream, Sarah said, winking at her former colleague. As Chloe left to prepare their drinks, Eleanor reached into her purse and removed a small velvet box. Not the one that had contained her locket, but another, newer one. I have something for you, Sarah, she said, sliding the box across the table. A token of my appreciation for everything you've done for our family. Sarah opened it to find a delicate gold necklace. Suspended from the chain was a small, exquisitely crafted pendant in the shape of a snowflake. It's beautiful, she breathed. A reminder, Eleanor said, her eyes twinkling with that familiar mischief that sometimes the most unexpected storms bring the greatest gifts. Alexander squeezed Sarah's hand. Mother has always had a flair for the poetic. A Winthrop trait, Eleanor corrected with mock severity. The Donovans are all practicality. And yet here we are. Alexander gestured to the three of them, the perfect balance of both. As Chloe returned with their drinks, Sarah looked around the diner where her life had changed course one snowy night. From waitress to artist, from stranger to family, from a woman just trying to survive to one helping create medicines that would save lives. Sometimes, she thought as she sipped her hot chocolate, the most extraordinary journeys begin with the simplest act of kindness. And sometimes, a single decision to help someone in need can transform not just their life, but your own in ways you could never imagine. Outside, fresh snow began to fall, but inside the corner booth, warmth and connection prevailed, a reminder that even in the coldest storms, human kindness remains the most powerful force of all.